Imagine this, you've just booked an Airbnb for hundreds of dollars. At first, the excitement is real. The photos look amazing, the host has 5 stars, and you feel like you're about to live like a true local. But when you walk in, there's a note waiting for you on the table. A list of chores. Strip the sheets, wash the dishes, take out the trash. Basically, clean the place before you leave. And that, of course, is on top of the huge cleaning fee you've already paid. That's the reality of Airbnb today. What started as a cheaper, more authentic alternative to hotels has turned into one of the most overrated and frustrating ways to travel. And people are starting to notice. Social media is flooded with complaints about hidden fees, surprise rules, and nightmare stays. Travelers are realizing that the promise of cheap and genuine accommodation no longer exists. The backlash has already begun. Cities are cracking down, guests are leaving, and what was once the future of travel suddenly looks like a company in decline. And you don't have to just take my word for it. Airbnb's finances are showing this strain. In the first quarter of 2025, revenue grew by just 6%, while profits plummeted by 42%. Today we're going to break down where it all went wrong, from outrageous fees to investors treating apartments like soulless hotels. And why the whole experience is completely inconsistent compared to, well, just booking a regular hotel. How did we go from air mattresses in a living room to chore lists and 3-figure cleaning fees? It wasn't a single mistake, it was death by 1,000 cuts. And today we're going to look at the 5 deepest cuts that bled out Airbnb's original promise, the wounds that could lead it to its own irrelevance. It all started with an idea so simple and brilliant, it seemed foolproof. In 2008, 2 designers in San Francisco, Brian Chesky and Joe Gebbia, couldn't afford their rent, so they bought a couple of air mattresses, rented out their living room to travelers, and called it Air Bed and Breakfast. The idea was simple. Live like a local, pay less than a hotel, and stay somewhere that truly feels like a home. And for a while, it worked beautifully. You could find quirky lofts, cozy guest rooms, even tree houses or cabins, often for a fraction of the price of a hotel room. It felt personal, it felt authentic, and it gave travelers a completely new way to see the world. It was the antithesis of the corporate hotel, sterile and impersonal. But that golden era is over. Today's Airbnb is not cheap. In fact, half the time it's more expensive than booking a hotel. A place listed for, say, $120 a night. By the time you actually pay, it's closer to $250. There's a service fee, a cleaning fee that sometimes exceeds the cost of a night's stay, and occasionally even an extra charge just for having more than one guest. And then, when you finally arrive, you're handed that infamous list of chores. Strip the sheets, wash the dishes, take out the trash. Basically, you're paying hotel prices for the privilege of being the cleaning staff. It's like going to a fancy restaurant, and after dessert, the chef asks you to wash the dishes before you leave. Oh, and you have to pay a fee for using the soap. This is the exact opposite of how Airbnb was sold to us. It started as the cheap and authentic alternative, but today it's an overpriced rental where you have to work. Suddenly, hotels that once seemed like the expensive and boring option now look like a haven of predictability and comfort. But the problem wasn't just that we became unpaid cleaning staff. The real poison came when hosts stopped being people and became corporations. This is where they really lost their way. Airbnb was supposed to be about regular people renting out a spare room. Instead, it turned into a large-scale real estate business. Investors started buying up apartments, houses, even entire apartment buildings, treating them like unregulated, inconsistent hotels. In cities like New York, Lisbon, and Barcelona, entire neighborhoods were transformed. Apartments that once housed families were turned into short-term rentals. The availability of housing dropped, rents skyrocketed, and locals were pushed out. For travelers, this meant that the dream of living like a local became a bad joke. And I think that's where Airbnb lost its magic. You no longer felt like you were staying in someone's home, living like a local. You felt like you were staying in the side business of a big investor. The live like a local became live like a tourist in a generic IKEA apartment that shares a wall with 7 other generic IKEA apartments full of other tourists. The platform, which was built on trust and community, became a tool for investment funds to optimize their returns. They ignored the fact that their product wasn't the space, but the experience of human connection. And by allowing that connection to fade away until it disappeared, they emptied their own brand of meaning. And with the professional investors came a professional mindset to squeeze out every cent, which leads us directly into the maze of fees. At first, the pricing was transparent. You saw a number, and that was more or less what you paid. Then, Airbnb introduced the service fee, a percentage that was added at the end. After that, hosts started adding increasingly high cleaning fees, and from there, Pandora's box was opened. Some hosts began to invent their own add-ons. I've seen it all. fees for additional guests after the first late check-in fees, even stories of hosts trying to charge for each load of laundry. Booking on Airbnb now is like assembling IKEA furniture without instructions. You start out thinking it's simple, but in the end, you have leftover pieces and you've paid twice what you expected in extra accessories. This pricing model is a nightmare from a consumer psychology perspective. Behavioral economists call it price partitioning. And although it may seem like a good idea to increase revenue in the short term, in the long run it creates deep resentment in the customer. It destroys trust. A customer who sees a price of $100 and ends up paying $180 feels deceived. No matter how clearly the fees are itemized on the final checkout page, the initial perception has already been damaged. Hotels, with their controversial resort fees, seem like elementary school kids compared to the Wild West of Airbnb fees, where every host is their own little tax dictator. And this lack of standardization is precisely what fuels the next problem. Because even if you were willing to pay a king's ransom for a night, you still face the biggest problem of all, the complete and utter lack of consistency. Unlike hotels, where you know exactly what you're getting into, every stay at Airbnb is a roll of the dice. A Marriott in Chicago isn't that different from a Marriott in Miami. The rooms are clean, the check-in process is clear, and expectations are set. Airbnb, on the other hand, is a total gamble. One stay might be incredible: attentive hosts, spotless rooms, and a local touch. The next one could be a nightmare. Broken locks, missing amenities, unclear instructions, or angry neighbors just because you're there at all. I've read horror stories that seem straight out of a movie. One of the craziest stories I found online was about a host who tried to charge a guest $7,000 for completely fake damages, including a broken fridge, a TV, and a stained sofa, all without providing a single photo as evidence. The problem is that there's no standard benchmark. Everything depends on the individual host, their personality, and how much effort they put in. That unpredictability might have been charming in the early days, when prices were low and the platform felt like an adventure. But as prices went up and Airbnb started positioning itself as a direct alternative to hotels, people began to demand consistency. And that's where Airbnb simply couldn't deliver. It's like a box of Forrest Gump's chocolates, except half the chocolates might be poisoned. You might find a hidden gem, or you could end up in a damp basement that smells like someone else's bad life choices. From a marketing standpoint, this is brand suicide. Trust is built on predictability. McDonald's became a global giant not because it has the best burger, but because a Big Mac tastes the same in Moscow as it does in Missouri. Airbnb sacrificed standardization for explosive growth, and now it's paying the price for that decision. This inconsistency and the influx of investors didn't just frustrate guests. Eventually, entire cities got fed up. As investors bought up entire buildings and turned them into short-term rentals, locals started getting pushed out. Housing that once belonged to residents disappeared from the long-term market. Rents skyrocketed, and neighborhoods started to feel more like tourist zones than communities. Streets that once had families and local shops now seemed like a revolving door for travelers with suitcases, and cities began to fight back. New York implemented strict registration rules that effectively eliminated most short-term rentals in apartment buildings. Barcelona limited the number of nights a property could be rented out per year, cracking down on absentee owners. And the backlash wasn't just legal, it was cultural. Neighborhood associations protested, locals organized demonstrations, and the media began labeling Airbnb as a threat to housing markets. Airbnb arrived in cities like that friend who crashes on your couch for a couple of days, and 6 months later has changed the locks, is subletting your closet, and has raised your rent on you. What started as a clever idea to let people live like a local had turned into a global headache. Investors were making profits, but cities were drawing red lines. Suddenly, Airbnb found itself on the defensive in some of its largest markets. It's a fundamental lesson in marketing and business. Ignoring the negative externalities of your business model is a ticking time bomb. Sooner or later, the community you serve and profit from will make you pay the price. And so the circle comes full circle. As cities cracked down, Airbnb's reputation was quietly crumbling. Memes on social media painted it as an unpredictable and expensive disaster, the exact opposite image of the carefree, live like a local idea they had sold. And on the other hand, hotels started to look better than ever. Unlike Airbnb, hotels offer consistency. You know what you're going to get: a clean room, check-in at any time, staff to help if something goes wrong. The variability that used to be Airbnb's charm, quirky, personalized stays, suddenly just felt like a risk. And travelers began to wonder, why not just book a hotel and avoid all the headaches? Airbnb is still a huge company, but its shine is fading. Its model, once hailed as revolutionary, was starting to feel more like a risky alternative than a smart choice. The promise of authenticity was replaced by investor greed, simplicity by hidden fees, and trust by an unpredictable lottery. The company that promised us we could belong anywhere is now struggling to find its own place in a world that has turned against it. And you? Have you had one of these nightmare experiences? Or do you still think Airbnb is worth it? Tell me in the comments. The story of Airbnb is a perfect example of how a brilliant idea can deteriorate to the point of becoming unrecognizable. A concept that experts call obsolescence, not just of products, but of promises. If you're interested in how companies design the failure of their own products so you'll keep buying, you have to watch my video on Obsolescence is Out of Control. I promise that after watching it, you'll look at your phone in a very, very different way.